Good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Welcome to the RSA 2023 Conference, Partners Perspective Track. My name is Pamela Fusco, and I am on the RSA Program Committee, and I'm here today to introduce you to Rohit Damakar, who will be talking about increasing security maturity and decreasing operational load, if the operational load is possible. Rohit is the Vice President of Fortran, and he has 20 years of experience in the cyber industry and also has a very diverse background that I'm certain he will share with you. Thank you all for joining. This session will be 50 minutes long. At the 40-minute mark, Rohan will take questions. Enjoy, everyone.
A very good morning to all of you. Thank you, Pamela, for that introduction. And before I begin, I thank you all, and you are really utterly dedicated cybersecurity professionals because you are here on a Wednesday, 8:30 a.m. after all those parties that happen on the RSA days. So thank you. As Pamela said, I have spent 20 years in this industry, and also I have mostly been a defender. That is, I have worked on various products that are used for defending against cyber attacks of all kinds. So that's sort of my background. Today, I am asking a seemingly impossible question, which is, can we increase our security maturity and decrease operational load at the same time? It's a wish that a lot of us here want to happen. And what I will also show you is a path to success in order to answer this question. So before I dive in, the standard RSA disclaimer. And I think security maturity means different things to a lot of different people. So to get on the same ground, I'm just trying to define what security maturity in general means, right? And for most people out here, I think this word, security maturity or security posture, right? It begins with almost a jolt. A jolt in terms of an event that happens in your organization. It could be a business, a large enterprise. It could also be a security vendor itself. And I'll tell you a little bit when I first came across this word in my professional life. This was as a security vendor many years back. We were all getting ready to go to Black Hat. Our product was a network product. And then we learned that, oh, in the Black Hat, there is a presentation out there which is talking about reverse engineering our product, and not just reverse engineering it, but disclosing all the 0-day the product protected to the whole world. So you can imagine the sudden avalanche that caused within the company. To respond to this incident that had happened, and at the same time, for months, the conversation were about, hey, how do we make the product more secure from this purpose? And I would love to hear your stories later if you have had that similar jolt. But that's what many times gets us into this action of what I call a security maturity conversation, especially when it gets the attention of all your C-level executives, it gets the attention of sometimes the board, and then there is a question that's constantly asked saying, hey, what are you doing to improve it, right? So in the broad sense today, we have a lot of frameworks that are available. And depending on your business and depending on what kind of maturity you are seeking, there is probably a capability maturity framework out there. So if you are a big bank, or if you are actually a managed service provider, you have frameworks available that will tell you how to improve your threat hunting, how to improve your SOC maturity. In many cases, when people are breached with phishing attacks, for instance, there is a framework available for increasing maturity along the axis for awareness. And you can add any latest thing that gets out there. Zero trust is the buzzword now, and people are trying to say, okay, how do I make my zero trust journey more mature? And a commonality in all of these frameworks is 4 or 5 stages where you don't have anything defined at all. You start defining it, start acting on it, and then you get to a little more mature state where you are measuring. You are measuring that. Some people call it security posture, as I said. So you're measuring that constantly and trying to improve it. And that's the journey that we normally take on this security maturity path in one or several dimensions. But what ends up happening generally, as you all, I'm sure, have faced here, is when you talk of this roadmap towards maturity, you are basically looking at 4 pillars. You're looking at people, process, technology, and services. That's what either of these are going to increase that maturity for you. And in most cases, the commonest thing people do is to go towards, okay, I'm going to buy some technology. I'm going to put a tick mark for my board saying, all right, I am more mature because now I have bought this technology, and I am going to need some headcount for that technology to work. And that's also a place where a lot of things end up suddenly breaking. Everybody is fine on that beautiful roadmap on your security maturity journey, but as soon as you start putting those dollars against headcounts or technology, things start to get a little dicey, right? And so the real question is there any magic that we can think about? And not even magic, a more pragmatic solution in the environment today where we actually do this impossible seesaw balance, right? Now, where do you need to really mature, right? The question comes to, okay, what does your individual attack surface looks like for your organization? And I have here listed what I call as 6 major ways in which you have to increase your maturity. So the servers, your workstations, and laptops, they have always been there with you for increasing your maturity. They have been ever present as we began our computation, right? So, and they're not going away. And especially in this, you will hear it like 100 times. Especially now, after COVID, your remote workforce has increased. So suddenly there is a lot more focus needed on the remote BYOD segment, bring your own device segment, for security maturity. The other interesting thing is, in security, when any component gets on your truck for more maturity, it never really leaves that truck. Just a few years back at RSA, I was having a conversation with one of my CISO friends, and I asked her, I said, what do you think? What are you most worried about now, today, in this landscape for the latest attack? And I was, expecting some new, latest vector to be thrown at me. And then she uttered the word configure. How many of you here have heard that word configure? Okay, so few of you, right? So this is as old as 2009. This was 2022. She was worried about configure. And this was a Microsoft worm that actually went against and had a lot of damage across the world. And in her environment, which was a production environment, doing critical production components in 2022. She was worried about configure the most. So that kind of tells you that things don't really get off that bandwagon. But there are lots of things that constantly get added to this. And as you can imagine, you have your cloud adoption today, which stands by rough estimates, people are running around 40% of their workloads in the cloud. And this is lift and shift. So they have just lifted the applications that they were running in data center, now they're running in the cloud. So your attack vectors that were pertinent there are now pertinent in the cloud, in addition to all the cloud identities that can be now attacked. Network devices, again, all of these sometimes are very seasonal too. So you will hear about attacks against a particular component for some time. It goes dormant for a long time, and then suddenly resurfaces. And there are many, many examples. So again, the key thing here to remember is nothing gets off that truck from a maturity perspective. You can think about a lot of Microsoft worms, which were, again, prevalent 15 years back. And at one point, I thought that Microsoft has completely patched the SMB RPC interfaces, and there will be no problems there. But come 2016, 2017, you have your Eternal Blue, your Petya, no Petya ransomware that's again affecting the world. Last year, we had again another critical vulnerability in the SMB. And sadly, we still had the same guidance from 15 years back saying don't allow access on ports 139 and 445 in 2021. Again, all of this keeps showing you that you have to not only worry about the past, but again in the future. So the future is around 70% of the workloads and the applications in the cloud in a couple of years are predicted to run more natively. This is exploiting all the native elements in the cloud. These applications would be rewritten, and that brings another attack vector. The last of the attack vectors there, the attack surface basically, is your SaaS applications. Again, they have mushroomed in every environment that you are in. On an average, enterprises today are running between 30 and 50 SaaS applications. And even if you have that wonderful sign-on, single sign-on for all these SaaS applications, what happens after that is a major area of concern. What happens after that typically is your insider threat, what people are doing, who is accessing that, can you track it? So that problem has again catapulted. So your attack surface today is very rich, and this is what is also pushing for that higher security maturity, not just on one or two components, continuously along the way. Sorry. And this has represented, in a sense, our journey for security maturity all along. You can think of it as like a retrospective view, but as we began on the hosts and when threat was contained and you knew the number of hashes that you can kind of detect, we started with AV. That is still prevalent in a lot of installations today. People are still running antivirus today as one of their major defenses. We moved at one point towards network and gravitated towards network where that was a choke point. You had a well-defined, wonderful perimeter. You could put things at the perimeter, like your intrusion prevention, your firewalls, your web application protection, and you had a wonderful security maturity just by installing that technology. As things started getting more encrypted, we moved on back to the host and said, okay, there is more. So we are constantly shifting our focus also along the way in these technologies from host to network to host. Then at some point, everything goes second generation because all the attacks have evolved. So you now need EDRs, you now need more machine learning, you all need that across all the technologies. Now you have the cloud, as we talked about. And in between, we also had the need to do more compliance. So throw the logs in. It was also a way of doing analysis retrospectively because anytime a breach happened, in hindsight, you could always find it in the logs. Unfortunately, not before it was done, but hindsight, that was present. So we started doing a lot of logging, and so this is a representation of the journey along the security maturity on an average. Now, I'm not representing here all the 500 or 600 vendor products you are going to see. I'm also not getting into the alphabet soup that gets presented in the security. Like now you start hearing of, we just had vulnerability management and configuration management. Now you have attack surface management, you have external attack surface management, you have cloud asset attack surface management, you have cloud security posture manager. You can construe any number of acronyms out there. And all of that is not represented here, but that's been our journey. So in a nutshell, what we have been doing for our maturity is we look at a vector, we pick a product, and bam, we go and put it in our networks for that defense. And sometimes these vectors are just very small components, but we still go and install a new product. Like a few years back, a very innovative product was there. It was actually doing, on an endpoint, scanning of the live memory. And this was done so that any malware that was evading otherwise could be caught when it's running live in the memory. Ideally, this would have been a great feature of an existing EDR tool, right? But what happened is the product was sold, the product was marketed as saying, okay, this provides the much extra level of security and scrutiny, and people went for it and installed it for that little sliver of attack vector. And we do it all the time. The result of all of this has been that we have gotten into what I call as this pyramidal situation in most of our environments. So you have, in many cases, different attack vectors that are targeting your various assets. These assets and the importance keeps changing in time. Like today, for example, your identity is your new perimeter. You do not have the traditional network perimeter today, but that place has been taken by the identity. You have your first generation technologies, your second generation technologies that are working in tandem to actually block. This is stopping before anything happens, a lot of attacks. And they are still essential. If you go and look at, just for fun, if you go and look at a lot of your web logs, your web servers that are exposed to the internet, you will still find that there are automated scanners that are constantly targeting these applications, and you will find actually even traces of NIMDA worm, the attacks that actually were in late 90s are there in these scanners. And people are still targeting your web server with those attacks. I don't know for what reason or who is successful. I hope nobody's running that IIS version today, but you will find those traces. So these products are doing a great job of blocking your known hashes, the known old patterns against various attacks. And even though people are claiming that the signature technology doesn't work anymore, yes, it doesn't work anymore, but you still have a lot of chaff, I would say, in the environment that's blocked by these technologies. The top is one of the most important. There is something that's bypassing all of these technologies every day. Your first and second level technologies, by second level I mean the next generation, which has come about on firewalls, has come about in terms of the host prevention, any other second generation technology that includes AI and ML, it's being bypassed. And these are the attacks that cause most damage. So you have a lot of products for security maturity, but at the same time now, in order to do this detection and response of what misses, these are the ones that cause the most damage in environments, you now need even more human investment for somebody to go and look at it and figure out, has the environment been breached? And so it's almost kind of a double whammy. You are needing more technologies. You're also needing a lot more human beings to look at and see if you have been breached. So where we have landed up in most environments today, right, is you have a lot of products that have been deployed. People many times do not see the overlap in technologies for the same attack surface. Like, I don't know how many of you, but people are running almost 10 to 15 agents on an endpoint. And many of these endpoints agents are overlapping. You have the same vulnerability scanning, your file integrity monitoring, your sometimes IDS, host-based IDS, your EDR, your AV, and a lot of these are overlapping, and people are not really kind of looking at how to exploit the best. Same thing happens at network level as well. People will go install certain network devices that will block your blacklists, known blacklists, whereas a lot of firewalls have the same functionality. It's a matter of automation and integration there. And every time we have introduced a new technology for defense, there is an increase in that operational load. What has been making the apex of that pyramid flow down again is the cybersecurity criminals are not stopping. And you will hear it all over, and I'm not going to reiterate about how these gangs are more financially motivated, just better organized to do all this. What I found very, very interesting is one of the recent Kaspersky reports where it said, given the environment today, given the number of people that may have lost jobs, our industry is actually far more secure in that term. People are hiring all these developers. And for what? For managing their command and control infrastructures, for managing malware that's more cross-platform, for making the malware more reliable. And they're offering some quite decent salaries to these people, to the developers. And where it ends up is, traditionally, there has always been evasion, either in terms of protocols. Now, the evasion has gone to the next level of blending in. So if you have seen ransomware attacks, a lot of them try to blend in. They try to use the tools that are already installed. That's what it's called living off the land binaries there. They're not installing new files which can be detected by hash and prevented by your AV or EDR. They're just using what's available there. And as a result, it's getting more difficult, and that's why you need a higher detection and response maturity to really look and stop these attacks. Very recently, Fortra collaborated with Microsoft and collaborated with FBI, and we brought down a whole range of command and control infrastructure for these cyber criminals. We looked at a lot of IP addresses that were doing C2, and we shut them off as best as possible. And I'm sure within no time, all of these gangs will go back and figure out some other way of putting that C2 out there for their purpose. So it's that constant arms race that's also dictating this puzzle. Now, one way that we have tried to deal with this problem is saying, okay, let's do machine learning. And every product today does some form of machine learning. It has become a commodity, and across the board, we have machine learning. So you have machine learning that's happening across the network. This is where today 40 to 45% traffic is just bot traffic. Your web traffic mostly is the bot traffic, and so you are trying to prevent that in the environment. And that's where machine learning is coming out to be handy, to detect the kind of sessions, the protocols, et cetera, used to detect bots. You have, at host level, a lot of machine learning being applied to commands which are being passed. So a lot of PowerShell commands, their parameters, that's been examined through machine learning to figure out, hey, can I detect the latest EDR or the latest breach? You have UBAD that has been happening now for a long time, user behavior anomaly, at both cloud level and both the on-prem level. Anything that the user has done in terms of doing some command that the user does not normally do, logging in from a different location, all of this is a part of the machine learning. And also, in terms of detecting the malware samples, today we have close to 1.2 billion overall number of known malware, We are increasing that at a rate of almost 90 or 100 million every year, and it's impossible to kind of spot all this without applying appropriate algorithms. And I'm giving you examples here across the board, and these are across the security controls that we will come to in a second how it all needs to tie up. But again, the machine learning hasn't come back to us with saying, okay, you do machine learning, and suddenly we are safe. Our posture is higher, we don't need more operational load. That's definitely not the case. So what's happening with machine learning is there is a gain. There is definitely a gain in terms of number of signals that you can prevent and you can block. But the number of suspicious things that the machine learning is throwing out there is also ginormous. It has increased many-fold compared to what is reliable. So now what happens is you look at a particular product and you look at the number of signals that it's giving out. It says something like, okay, 60% I think this file is suspicious. And now the onus is on the receiver of that signal to do something with that file. Do you block it? Will it have adverse effects? Do you have the right set of people with the right talent in the environment to say, okay, I'm going to run a static scan, I'm going to run a dynamic scan on this file, I'm going to figure out more nature of this file to figure out if it's good or bad. And that's increasing, again, your operational load. So machine learning has not just gone and said, okay, yeah, we do machine learning, your operational load is reduced, everybody's happy. It has, in fact, in many cases, caused an increase in the operational load. And you hear this over and over again, but I will reiterate it here in this slide, is if you need more people to figure out what that machine learning solution is giving as an outcome for you, you need more people, more skilled people. As it is, it's difficult to retain talent. As it's difficult to find new talent for your cloud infrastructure. And one of the other statistics that again is very interesting in this light is the cloud services have been adding a lot more different type of services. If you just look at Amazon for a second, it has added between 10 and 20 new cloud security services every year. So you need that many more people to figure out, okay, what that new service is, what its attack surface is, what analytics should I have, what detection should I have, and what should I monitor constantly in that environment. So it's not an easy journey when you already have those 3.5 or 3, whatever that number today thrown is, of cybersecurity vacancies, and that's getting actually compounded by not having the right talent with and I would say a very increasing speed of maturity on cloud. So where do we land at finally, right? What you have been hearing about is, okay, we have attack surface that we need security maturity for. We go and keep increasing that maturity by adding more technologies. If we are lucky, we get more people in our operations side to manage those technologies. The hackers, again, are at it, and they have now upped the game. In fact, now the game is not more black and white, it is far more gray, and that's what the machine learning is showing you. There is a lot of gray here that needs to be looked at. If you even think about like the famous Target breach that's talked about, it had the third-party HVAC. That was one of, I would say, the supply chain kind of breaches, the first of them. It had its HVAC vendor that was breached in one of the alerts amongst thousands, which were not looked at. So you have not solved that problem totally. So what is a solution from a security perspective here? The solution is looking at the problem in two different broad buckets. The one bucket on the left is you don't want to leave any stone unturned about finding what's suspicious. So you have enough security controls in your environment that may eject any kind of signals which you want to collect. So this is your false negative reduction, okay? This is your maturity in terms of saying, okay, I'm not going to be breached easily. The right side of the system needs to have not only a combination of these signals, but also in terms of contextualization of the environment. And that's a very essential component. Every environment is different. The way the applications are deployed is different. And so you need these signal combination with the right context, whether learned automatically or whether input, manual input, doesn't matter. So when you have these two halves that are acting in tandem, there is a hope for actually having a higher maturity, at the same time decreasing the operational load. And notice here, I haven't thrown any alphabet soup at you. I have not said SIM, NDR, MDR, XDR, PQR in this context. This is where you need to really look for any platform. This is basically a basis of a platform that needs to be looked at, and one needs to ensure that it has both parts of this equation satisfied. And why I talk about a platform here also is from a perspective of vendor consolidation. You saw there, and that's why I have deliberately given you examples across this presentation from various security controls. I just didn't speak of one security control as a dominant one. You need, for visibility and for the threats that are prevalent today, you need a lot of these security controls. But as best, they can come from one vendor. There is a great advantage there. Think about trying to make a smart home, right? You are going to pick various components for the smart home. You have your bulbs, you have your sensors, you have your music speakers, whatever else you may have. If you pick them up from too many different people, the interaction between them is not going to be the optimal interaction that you're looking for your home. It's exactly a similar analogy here. These vendors and the various signals, every vendor knows its strength, every vendor knows its controls weaknesses. They don't go and publicize these weaknesses out there for competitive purposes, but they know inherently. So they are in the best position to combine the signals from these controls for a very effective outcome. So if you look at your entire MITRE, they may have, the idea there, of course, is to make sure that no attack goes from left to the right, no attack goes from your initial access all the way to exfiltration. And every vendor who makes multiple security controls is aware of their strengths along that axis, and they can position their controls the best for that purpose. Now, we're not going to also be, let's not be under any delusion that we'll have a utopia of one vendor, all security controls from that vendor, all beautifully integrated. It's not going to happen. So the act would be to choose a few of these vendors that have these controls integrated well, and then you bring them together, whichever platform that's chosen. And one thing to kind of, as consumers, really to demand from vendors is that they follow as much open schemas available for integration. So last year, OCSF framework, this is an open cybersecurity schema framework, was produced out of a lot of vendors. And this really has a lot of details where you can combine these signals. The algebra, you don't need to worry about algebra, the vendor will do the algebra. But with this kind of a framework, it's possible to combine composite signals together for that higher security outcome. At the end of the day, all we are looking for is making sure that too many of these suspicious things coming out do get combined, and we are able to reduce that number of breach days Today, I think it stands somewhere between 80 and 100, looking at various reports. But it is between 80 and 100 because of the gray nature of the attacks today and of the fact that we do not have a lot of environments using this composition correctly. So if I have to kind of give a few takeaways from here is, if you are still running with point tools in your environment, go and try to look at a platform that will integrate them well. Go and try to look for few vendors that will help you achieve that picture for you. And make sure that these vendors are talking very openly for this kind of an integration. And that is the only hope for having an increasing maturity and decreasing your load at the same time. If you are an SMB or SME business, I would suggest it's best to focus on your core competency, which is that business. And given the complex nature of the threats today and a lot of the gray nature of the threats, to leave this to a service provider of your choice. That's the best outcome. Because in most cases, all of these attacks have never differentiated between industries as a whole. Right now, actually, with the price of Bitcoin, whatever it is, your mining attacks have decreased. But if you are running an environment up in the cloud, even if you are a small SMB, SME business, there is a high chance that somebody wants to exploit that for more coin mining. So services is the best route there. If you are an enterprise, you need to choose the right platform with the vendor consolidation to achieve this. And at this point, I would like to open the floor for any questions.
Hi, my name is Tim Tang with Hughes. With the rapid evolution of the cyber threats that are out there, I was wondering if you could maybe provide some guidance on how to quantify the flexibility, the future flexibility capabilities of these platforms. How do you make a decision now that's going to be viable with future unknown threats?
So I think it's a very interesting question. It is also a difficult question to answer. The only answer that can be given is based on the past performance of that particular tool you're looking at. So how successful have they been in the past to defend against the latest 0 days, for instance? And you will have to take the past performance as an indication of what they can do in the future. So there is the other part of this puzzle also is, if consumers actually are pushing back on vendors and they want a standardized testing, that is another way, that the vendor needs to continuously go through certain standardized tests so that you are constantly at the edge for detecting the latest stuff.
Since there are no other questions, I was wondering, could you also categorize some of the weaknesses or the common weaknesses that you are seeing in the platforms that are out there today?
Again, it's a tricky question, but I think if you look at it, the strategy has been, and I will paint you the two extremes. We have had SIEM technology for a while, right? The SIEM vendors typically are consuming every control possible. They have integrations into hundreds of different things. However, they do not control the actual security content from those controls, right? The SIEM vendors are just integrating them. And they do not have the internal knowledge of how each signal from each vendor is for its confidence level, especially if you are combining the suspicious signals, right? Because anything that's absolutely blocked, in today's world, it gets blocked. It's all that grayness that's causing all of this damage that we see. So on the other hand, you can have platforms that have combined only their controls well, which is they produce a set of controls, they know what they are, they have an aggregate output from those controls. And then there are platforms which are, I would say, hybrid of those two, and I am going to now use the word XDR in a sense, where the vendor has certain controls with security content, And at the same time, you also have vendor integrating with some more controls to bring that puzzle into the platform. So there is a pros and cons along all this axis. Anything else? Yes.
Hey, my name is Shai Hasidim from Robust Intelligence. I don't know if you can go back to one of the machine learning slides. It sounds like that without proper machine learning AI, none of these platforms, none of these tools would actually deliver sensible kind of security. Can you just kind of describe your vision in terms of actually utilizing machine learning? Because as far as I understand, that's our lifesaver. There's no human, there's no way that we can actually have all these implemented with classic labor. So we'll need the bots that will consume all this data, process it, analyze it, and actually generate or some actionable trigger activity that update the controls, update the configuration.
Excellent question. So I think depending on which area of the attack vector you are looking at, as this kind of illustrates, you need machine learning algorithm for that specific threat that's evading. Like take for example, I'll give you the living off the land binaries example for ransomware. It's using the commonly available Windows binaries. So you cannot actually take them out of the Windows system, it will stop functioning. But what you are doing by machine learning there is you're looking at a user, you're looking at things like, okay, has he ever used this binary, right? You're looking at that frequency. And then you are kind of coming back and saying, well, never used in the past, has suddenly used it today. And that gives you that suspicious trigger. Now, it could be, for example, when you take that one step further, that the user has legitimately learned more stuff on Windows, and he's just trying that command line, right? And so in that case, it would be a false positive. And that's why you need something else, right? Something else from that system which says, okay, this user touched this binary for the first time ever, and oh, I see a new DNS request that has gone out in my environment, a domain that was registered in the past 10 days from the same system. Now I can combine those two together and say something fishy is happening on that system, go and look at that. So that's why if you take machine learning in isolation, for one, it doesn't give you that view. You have to combine that with something else which is appropriate. And that's why a lot of this machine learning, unfortunately today, even today with all the compute power we have, it is not happening in packet time. In the beautiful old land, and which still persists in many cases, you could look at a particular packet and you could just block it, saying this is an attack. It happens today for technologies like WAF, for instance. They look at the request and they'll say this looks anomalous to me and I'm going to drop it. But in a lot of cases, especially when machine learning and involved machine learning is there, you need to be more in the detect and respond framework. And at that point, the job more becomes saying, okay, how am I going to actually stop the damage from this? And so you have a range of logs here. Like, I mean, anytime you enter a new territory, for example, when we did the lift and shift to the cloud, you suddenly have cloud plane logs now to be looked at. If you're using your GitHubs and Atlassians, that's again another set of log you have to look at.
Yeah, that's true. But you know what? You're actually introducing another major problem, which is privacy. It means, from what you just said is that these systems would know everything about us. Everything that we do would have to be somehow shared with I don't know, a cloud-based system that will be able to digest it, process it. But these systems would have to be extremely secured, and there will be probably some sort of a new privacy law. I know that this is something that's been discussed lately, somehow to protect all of us.
I think
I know,
that's also a very valid point, but if I right now at the moment deconstruct that argument, it's the responsibility of the vendor to make sure what it's taking up as signals in the cloud is something that's not your personal data. Okay, it's not, that's the responsibility of the vendor, and that the control needs to ensure. However, if that system, let's say, is still compromised, at that point it really doesn't matter, because the person who has compromised it is going to take away that data. So the control, as far as it's running on the system and ensures that it does not take your private information. Like if you have launched a PowerPoint process, it's not a private information. If you have launched a PowerPoint process with some weird argument, that's not a private information. But the moment it kind of starts taking your PDF files or something that you may have stored, that's where I think the control, it's the vendor's responsibility for that control to ensure that the vendor doesn't take that PII information up there. Thank you. Thanks, guys. Thank you.